Hello and welcome to Group Number Three's Information Organization's Contrast and Synthesis presentation, and today we'll be focused on the interviews that we conducted in public libraries. On this slide, you'll see that we try our best to contextualize the librarianship that we encountered in our interviews. We have a where, which in Michigan, we don't have any cities with the same population density that one might associate with somewhere like Chicago or Minneapolis, so it's unsurprising that the largest urban setting we visited still qualified as a smaller city. We also have a who, in that we managed to interview representatives from a large range of hierarchical positions. Our what is that we also interviewed people who ranged several different departments and specializations. In her article, Future-Proofing the Public Library, Maria Lehman writes about the ways in which librarians are increasingly becoming sense-makers rather than gatekeepers of information. She describes how one major aspect of sense-making is learning to detect patterns in data. Not only is this an essential part of the service that we provide patrons when we work in libraries, but it's also a part of the process of reflecting on and progressing library services as a whole. With this as an anchoring goal, we will be exploring Michigan library data patterns, or in some cases, a lack thereof, as we seek to determine areas of contrast. The elements that we chose to focus on were attendance and demographics of patrons, library layout and setting, and quantity and quality of library resources. Here we can see the range of reactions to the question of patron demographics and identity. Many interviewees thought first of age, race, and ethnicity when describing their users. Another social facet that came into play was that of poverty, as several library professionals noted the influx of homeless patrons. This observation was echoed by a survey published in Government Information Quarterly, which found that Michigan patrons who are living near or below the poverty line are especially reliant on the public access computers that libraries provide, most of which they used in order to seek employment and support from social services. All this being said, there was not a cohesive answer to the question of who comes to your library. Many of the interviewees gave drastically different indications of the age, race, ethnicity, poverty level, etc. of those who decided to use their space. Our exploration of the physical spaces in libraries also showed a range of perspectives. We found similar components and sections, but choices around ambiance, arrangements, and style were varied by location. Here we can see 3 sections for 3 different audiences at different libraries. A whimsical take on fantasy storytelling for youth at the far right. At center, a simple, modern reading space for adults. And on the far left, a large young adult space decorated by teens in a reflection of the slightly rebellious and irreverent culture of the town in which the branch was located. Some of the libraries we visited were either currently undergoing or had recently undergone a redesign of their space. In the case of one interviewee, they described attempting to support the day-to-day functionality of their branch while at the same time packing for a major move, heavily relying on the Dewey Decimal System to maintain some method to the madness, whereas the library branch pictured on the right had comfortably shut down for over a month to reorganize and unveil a new browsing system that did away with Dewey Decimal altogether. Nearly all the resources mentioned in the interviews could be filed somewhere under technology, community, or curation of services. Again, we see similar themes, but the perception of their library's strongest resources differed greatly by location. In discussing what resources they were already able to offer, some libraries represented themselves as having high volumes of print material circulation, while others highlighted their programmatic offerings. 2 libraries invested heavily in maintaining bookmobile operations to expand the scope of their impact. Some libraries had moved towards the approach of a library of things, with less traditional items growing in their collections, such as STEM and play kits. Others still hoped to add infant-specific kit options and hadn't had the opportunity. This particular point spoke to a perceived need on the part of the interviewee for new mothers to have access to trying free toys for their babies. We also asked what they would add if they could. Some had very specific tools in mind, particularly those to increase accessibility for patrons with disabilities, whereas others hoped to forge more community partnerships and pool resources with entities like the public schools. One interviewee stated that they were pretty happy with the resources that they had, but they also seemed to be speaking specifically to the department that they worked in, as opposed to the library as a whole. These small twists and turns in offerings shouldn't be surprising. In an article featured on Public Libraries Online, the authors state that special collections should grow out of specific community needs and that a range of unique offerings can show how, quote, responsive and flexible a truly community-centered library can be, end quote. It's important to note here the ways in which resources beget resources. Michigan law states the majority of public library funding is dependent on tax base of the community that it represents. This forces communities with lower property values and higher poverty rates to get creative with supporting their resources development to compensate. So what did we learn through this sense-making process? In terms of gathering our data, the scope of experience and specific career focus of those we interviewed greatly affected the lens with which they responded. Some of our answers would have been very different depending on who stepped up to provide their perspective. We state here that libraries in different municipalities naturally have differences, but beyond that, there can even be differences in resources and cultures between the branches of the same library system, as many noted that different branches had different patron demographics depending on their location, accessibility, and staffing. From a broader view, although all libraries have fundamental similarities, part of that foundational quality is always a reflection of the community. Different communities mean differences in libraries.